The Center of WorkLife Law has an initiative dedicated to assisting employees, employers, attorneys to navigate the many legal and practical considerations around pregnancy and breastfeeding at work. My guest today is staff attorney Juliana Franco, and we talk about the center's role in providing legal support for employees who are breast pumping at work, as well as employers in how to meet the legal requirements for lactation support at work. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Visit the Kickstarter campaign for the Calla breast pump that mimics suckling. And now, enjoy the talk. I am here today with Juliana Franco. Juliana, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me here today, Eva.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you here. You work for an organization that is called the WorkLife Law. And I just want to say that the mission statement of the organization is really grabbed my attention, and I really like it. It goes work towards a future where no one is forced to choose between caring for their loved ones and keeping a paid job. I think the fear of losing our jobs or being valued less as an employee because we are caring for our family members is such a big source of stress for everyone. So I was very curious how your organization, what your organization does to try to reach that point where we don't feel forced to choose between these two fundamentally important parts of our lives.
So, the Center for Work-Life Law is a research and advocacy organization housed at the University of California College of the Law, San Francisco. It was founded over 20 years ago by Joan Williams and collaborator, Cynthia Thomas Calvert. And basically, the idea is we look at the laws that are in place in the United States and see how they are impacting the lives of working caregivers, and what we analyze what could be done better. So, for example, a lot of the initial work of the Center for Work-Life Law was around developing this theory of what's called family responsibilities discrimination or caregiver discrimination, and looking at cases in the courts in the United States where employees were treated differently than their coworkers because of their caregiving duties. So, for example, mothers being denied promotions or assignments that would lead to a promotion because of stereotypes about their commitment to their job. You know, the whole idea, well, you're a mom, you probably don't want to travel for work because you have kids, or no, she probably doesn't want to advance to partner because that would require more hours. But those same stereotypes weren't being put on men. But at the same time, men who acted in ways to, be a caregiver were also being penalized. So a lot of the work started around, developing this theory, but then also tracking as laws change, um, how they're being interpreted, how they're playing out in the real world, and seeing where we could, provide research that could be used to advocate for changes in policies, where we could develop model policies that, legislators could use, that employers could look to. And a lot of it was also, developing guidance, because unfortunately, even though what people may be well-intentioned, if they do not know the requirements that are put on them or their rights, things can go wrong. So we want to make sure that everyone has information to make the right choice for themselves and for their business, while kind of taking a step back from a research angle and making sure that we can show people the impact of laws in certain places so that we can advocate for policies that, protect more people and provide more clarity for employers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very good. And one of the big areas, I suppose, of this work is focusing on pregnant women and mothers who breastfeed. And there is a whole initiative around this within the WorkLife Law called Pregnant at Work. and it provides
Yes.
resource materials for pregnant and breastfeeding employees about their rights, but also for employers about their responsibilities. So I was curious what sort of resources are there available, particularly for breastfeeding women?
Yes, so pregnantatwork.org is a website where we provide resources for, like you said, employers, employees, healthcare providers
Mhm.
on their, rights and responsibilities. A lot of the resources are kind of tailored to be more practical. So, for example, for employees, we have guides that are specific to the state that they work in on how to talk to your boss about your bump. So, how to ask for pregnancy accommodations and how to inform your employer that you are pregnant. It's not just like this is what the law says, it's also practical tips about how to have these conversations, what should happen, and what to do if things don't exactly go the way that you hoped they would. And that it was really developed out of the idea that when someone informs their employer of their pregnancy or asks for a change at work, which is commonly called a reasonable accommodation,
Mhm.
that's often a flashpoint for discrimination.
Mhm.
We see workers who need changes at work. Unfortunately, um, sometimes the employer doesn't quite understand what the change is, or there's just this stigma against giving someone changes or quote unquote special treatment, that we know
Right.
it's not special treatment. And people can lose their jobs, which is hugely detrimental, especially when you're about to have a child. There are so many expenses incoming. Cost of living is so high, so we want to make sure that people know how to have these conversations
Mhm.
and also seek relief if things don't go as planned. Similarly, with breastfeeding, we have guides called How to Talk to Your Boss About Your Pump, about how to talk to your employer about lactation accommodations and breastfeeding. And that could be a very taboo topic for people, because people don't like talking about their bodies at work.
Right.
But sometimes you need to educate your employer, your supervisor, that breast milk is food, so you need to make sure that your pumping space is sanitary, that you need time every couple hours to express milk. It's not something that you can just wait 8 hours. That would be incredibly painful and could lead to mastitis.
Yeah.
So it's not only informing people very simply what their rights are, but also how to have this what could be a very sensitive or awkward conversation,
Mhm.
and also coming at it from the point of view that your employer may not know what their obligations are. So don't come at it from a thinking that they are trying to not be helpful, but think of it as a collaboration. You're having a conversation to see how we can meet each other's needs. And for employers, we have information on their obligations under law, sample accommodations. So sometimes just ideas for how a job can be changed or things can be done differently to meet the employee's needs, but also to make sure that the employer knows that there are options. It's not necessarily a one and done thing. You can work with the worker to figure out what suits their job, what suits their condition, what works for both people. It's a lot more flexible and doesn't have to be combative. And then, healthcare providers are really key in this whole process, because a lot of the times they'll provide a note of recommending the accommodation. And we want to make sure that the healthcare providers know what's legally required in these notes, or even if it's not legally required to provide a note, what could be helpful and what privacy protections also the workers have.
Mhm.
um, you know I think sometimes people worry about disclosing a condition in the
Yeah.
workplace, because there's also the possibility of associated discrimination if you're perceived as having a disability. But, we think if we are working at the different points where someone could have conflict and making sure that people just have the tools they need,
Mhm.
things could run so much more smoothly. So that's
Yes.
kind of a bit of the resources we have for attorneys and employers. We have, like I said, brief explainers on the law, links to helpful resources from agencies. We post, webinars that we provide, and everything is free. So the
Oh,
information is there. So we hope people use it.
yeah, that's fantastic actually to have these resources available for free because as you say, often it's the lack of communication, the lack of knowledge as opposed to what people's intentions are. You mentioned
Mhm.
there that healthcare providers can give a note, and I was just curious,
Mhm.
does that apply for breastfeeding as well? So, like, is there some type of note that the healthcare provider can give to say that pumping and providing breast milk has that vital effect for the infant, so it should be accommodated or something like that, or that's for something else?
Yes. So, whether a note is required depends on where the employee works. So states
Right,
have different requirements, but having a note from a healthcare provider can be really helpful in, making sure that the employee can access what they need, or it can even like help facilitate that conversation with the employer.
right.
And we actually have a model note that we, co-created with the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU,
Mhm.
for doctors to use that kind of explains, the benefits of breastfeeding, kind of the physical requirements around pumping regularly, just things that I think we don't talk about in our society. People don't know very much about breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Personally, even
Hmm.
though I worked in this world, I learned so much more once I became a mother because it's
Hmm.
something that I think we don't really publicly talk about too much.
Yeah.
So just knowing that, there are real health risks associated with not expressing regularly, that it is a food, so it needs to be pumped in a sanitary place, that workers need, adequate time to express. It's not something that can be done in, 10 minutes.
Yes.
That would be amazing. Um, I cannot tell you how many hours I've spent pumping as a like in the first year of motherhood.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah, so it's a lot of work, and it can also be really emotional when you can't do it. So I think it's also important for, not just the physical health, but the mental health of women in the workplace to be able to access, these needs. So yes, having a note from your doctor can certainly help that conversation. It's not always required.
Right.
And it's something that we think should just be a given. If someone needs it, they should be able to receive it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's surprising that these conversations still have to happen because I live in a world as well where this knowledge is basic standard knowledge, but of course you cannot expect people who breastfeeding is an intimate affair pretty much.
Mhm.
So you cannot expect that everybody around you would have this on their radar and would know those exact details that you would have to pump three
Yeah.
times during an 8 hour work shift or
Yes.
that it takes 15 minutes or more.
Mhm.
Yes, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that's excellent. I never heard that before, that a note, it's possible to get a note
Mhm.
from a healthcare provider. And I think that that's true, that it would really help the conversation between
Yeah.
employer and employees.
And then sometimes, if people need something that goes beyond, the break time and space, if they need other changes in the workplace to help them with their, breastfeeding related needs, that's something that the healthcare provider can also, help
Mm-hmm.
with their note. For example, if people work somewhere that requires them to wear like a very constricting uniform, they could request
Right.
changes to that, or a temporary shift to another position. And, or, perhaps, when you're breastfeeding, you get very hungry, very thirsty, like maybe permission to have like a water bottle with you at your station if you're somewhere that,
Mm-hmm.
typically doesn't allow that, or just um, if you need to shift your hours slightly because of your child's feeding schedule, and just there are so many creative ways that we could help people achieve their goal of breastfeeding their infant.
Yes, and there is not one standard solution.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the most important legislative achievement of recent years was the
Mm.
passing of the Pump Act. It was a joint effort of many organizations over the course of several years. So it's a really big deal that it was passed last December. So I was very curious if you could tell us a little bit about the journey of getting there.
So it was a huge victory, and arguably, I think one of the most exciting things to happen for a lot of attorneys that work in this field. And, this work has been going on for a very long time. But I think, really what formally started a lot of the process was the Affordable Care Act in
Mhm,
2010, that did, kind of begin more like the legal requirements for people to have access to break time and space in the workplace. However, a lot of people weren't, necessarily covered under the law, and it was a starting point to have these conversations. A lot of the work that we did after the Affordable Care Act, but before the Pump Act, was around seeing how, states adopted their own, break time and space and accommodation laws to, permit people to have this time and space in the workplace and what they need. And we saw, states kind of slowly start passing these laws, and we tracked, their effects on case law, and you know, how discrimination was still a big issue. It was something we really needed a national protection because it was such a patchwork of laws for people to get their needs met. Um, and of course, during the pandemic, we saw that there was a formula shortage,
right.
and a caregiving crisis. So these conversations were coming up a lot more like, well, we want people to go back to work, but there aren't really the supports that are needed, universally across the United States so that people can breastfeed. But there's also a shortage of food for babies and not very many alternatives. So um, you know, that conversation was had about, what are we really doing to enable people to continue their breastfeeding journey when they go back to the workplace? And, for years, this type of legislation was introduced, wasn't always successful. But after a lot of work by, talented advocates and really motivated legislators, and, concessions were made along the way. As you see, airline crew members and pilots are excluded from the
Mhm,
law. Um, it was passed, and it was really, I think, the effort of, decades of work,
mm,
and a very, very dedicated uh, collaboration of partners that got it through in about 2 or 3 years.
mhm.
Um, it was incredible. I'm in awe of my colleagues who worked really dedicated their so much of their time to it. It is something that I think future generations of women in the United States are going to hopefully appreciate.
Yes.
And well, not just women, all, breastfeeding and chest feeding people. So I mean, it's hard to say like really what the lead up to it was when it was years and years of efforts, slowly building on laws and talking to people in different states about why this is important. If you want to support families and children and, women in the workplace,
Mhm.
this is critical. You can't ignore it. And the I think the pandemic really brought a lot of these issues up. Like
Yeah.
we need more of an infrastructure, and this is such a simple place to start.
Yes.
So yes, so I think now a lot of the work that we're doing in our organization is making sure that people understand what their rights are under the law, making sure that employers also know what their obligations are, that we have kind of a clear understanding of guidance. The Department of Labor put out, guidance for
Mm-hmm.
folks that we think is really helpful. So we want people to know that that exists. And, there's still questions that are coming up every day about, how this could affect particular workers in particular situations. And we just want to make sure that people, have the information they need to make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
Mm-hmm.
And provide any support that we can.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's exciting.
Oh, it's so exciting. I was so excited when I saw it in December. I remember last June, I think it was in June, when it first time didn't pass,
Mhm.
right? And then it came back, and I wasn't actually expecting. I was very surprised that it was coming back and being
Mhm.
victorious in such a short period of time. So that was so amazing.
Yes, and like I said, two of my colleagues, Liz Morris and Jessica Lee, they're absolutely brilliant. They, I think, were really our office champions on,
Mm-hmm.
the bill and the research behind it. So I think, a huge shout out to all the advocates and people who for decades have done the research behind this to get it passed. It was, I think, surprising for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think the expectation was like, okay, well, maybe it'll need to be introduced another time.
Yeah,
But I think it was time.
it
It was
was.
time.
Oh, it was great. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I saw you celebrated at the White House not that long ago, right?
Yeah, so the White House had a celebration
Mm-hmm.
for the Pump Act where advocates were invited. Our Deputy Director, Liz Morris, and our Director of the Pregnant Scholar Initiative, Jessica Lee, were in attendance. I think, it's such an amazing
Mm-hmm.
kind of like gathering of people to celebrate this incredible law. And I'm just hoping that there is more opportunity to celebrate as we, make more progress for the rights of caregivers in the workplace.
Absolutely. I think seeing the difference it will make to moms' lives is the real
Mhm.
celebration.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we are 8 months into the act being passed, and I think that was a grace period up until May when companies would have to kind of get their act together and figure out how they're going to comply. So I was just curious how things are going after 8 months.
So like I said, the guidance that the Department of Labor issued, I think, has been very helpful in people understanding what their obligations are under the law, what their rights are. I think, a lot of the past 8 months have been working around people understanding not just the Pump Act, but the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that also passed in December, and how they essentially work together.
Mhm.
So we have been answering a lot of questions from people on our free legal helplines, providing, written comments to agencies. We've been looking at, trends in the law and, closely watching out for cases that may be filed, just to see kind of the direction things are going. A lot of what we really have been, noticing is really that it is rings true that when people have clear guidance about their rights and responsibilities, litigation rates tend to, not be as high. So, for example, in family caregiver laws, so not quite, the exact same type of cases and not the Pump Act or the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. I don't think we have enough data to really analyze that yet.
Mhm.
But with family caregiver laws in the United States, we saw that, it was like a fraction of a percentage, like that an employer was likely to be sued when there was a law in place. You're more likely to be struck by lightning.
Hmm.
So, thinking of that, when there's clear guidance for people on, accommodating pregnant workers and acknowledging that lactation is a pregnancy related condition. So you also need to accommodate that. and then having the Pump Act and its very clear guidance by the Department of Labor, um, I think that clarity is something beautiful. It makes people feel confident about what they can ask for, what they can receive, and what employers can provide for employees. We've seen, in research from years before the laws that when you provide these types of protections for workers, you increase retention rates, you increase productivity, overall employee morale and health. It's just incredible. So we're hoping to see the same effects. But in the past 8 months, I think a lot of it has been sorting out any questions people may have because these laws work together. And also just, being really on hand on our phone lines, making sure that, people know what has changed.
Mhm.
And a lot of our work has also been on providing webinars for attorneys and just generally folks in the public who, want to know how this impacts them
Mhm.
and what they can do to support people in the workplace.
Right. So
Mhm.
of the website, I'm going to include in the description links to these guidances and of course
Mhm.
the website of the Pregnant at Work initiative. And I guess there is a helpline phone number there if somebody needs any further information or help with this. You mentioned about the webinar. So you introduced a webinar about the Pump Act itself. And
Mhm.
would you mind to tell us who is it for and what do you cover in this training?
So the webinar was part of a two-part webinar series with the National Employment Lawyer Associations and other collaborating organizations. The first webinar was about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and the second was about the Pump Act. And a lot of the discussion was about the guidance that came out, but also kind of, let me look at the description again. So basics, identifying the needs of workers, best practices for counseling workers who are in need of lactation accommodations, and also just really understanding how the Pump Act intersects with the new Pregnant Workers Fairness Act.
Mhm.
And it is available for free to watch on YouTube. We have a link to it on our website. The intended audience is attorneys,
Right.
but I think the way that the information is displayed could be useful for advocates.
Mhm.
And I think there may be some upcoming webinars or existing webinars by other partner organizations that are aimed more at workers.
Right.
But regardless, a lot of our website has, free worker resources. We're in the process of updating pretty much every single resource document on our website, both with state specific information, but also, federal information on these laws, so that workers know what their current status is.
Yes.
But again, if anyone has questions, we have our free legal helplines. They're, like I said, free.
Mm.
And we really enjoy being able to help people understand their rights, or, if something feels like it's not being handled correctly at work,
Mhm.
and they just want an opinion, someone to talk something through and learn about their options. We're there for that too, because of course, people have the option to file, a complaint with a federal enforcement agency. But sometimes I think people first want to talk to someone so they know how to handle things, with their employer, maybe by like writing a letter or having a difficult conversation before it gets to the point of filing a complaint.
Mhm. That's fantastic. I think that's such a great help for mothers and employers as well. Okay, well, is there anything else that you would like to add, or you have any thoughts to add to this?
I think really, I encourage people to, seek out this information if you feel that you are in a situation in the workplace where you're, not being supported or unaware of what your rights are. We have our free legal helpline. We're always there to support folks. And also, our tools are free. Partner organizations also have, great free tools. Information is out there. So I just want to assure people that there is a support network.
Yes.
These laws passed, but you're not, alone in trying to figure it out. I know a lot of the times motherhood can already be overwhelming enough. Please seek out our support. We are there for you, just waiting to answer your call.
I think that is so good. We're going to include all of those details in the description. I think it's so amazing. And even just knowing that this support network is out there, that's half of the support that we actually need. That confidence of knowing that we are not alone in this is just amazing. So thank you so much for the time and for this amazing work that you do.
Thank you.